Sex is really strange. You ask people, what's your favorite activity? And if you ask people, particularly college students, particularly just fresh from spring break, I've seen teen movies, they'll often answer sex or some word that is synonymous with sex. But there's a kind of a puzzle about how much time we spend on sex. And it turns out there's data on this. So people say sex is their favorite activity, but it turns out we actually know how much time the average American spends on sex. And the data I'm going to follow up from was summarized by in this wonderful book by James Gleick. Americans tell pollers their single favorite activity is sex. In terms of enjoyability, they rank sex ahead of sports, fishing, bar hopping, hugging and kissing, talking with the family, eating, watching television, going on trips, planning trips, gardening, bathing, shopping, dressing, housework, dishwashing, laundry, visiting the dentist, and getting the car repaired. On the other hand, these same studies suggest that the average time per day devoted to sex is 4 minutes and 3 seconds. As Gleick says, this is not much, even if the 4 minutes excludes time spent flirting, dancing, oogling, cruising the boulevard, toning up in gyms, toning up in beauty parlors, rehearsing pickup lines, showering, thinking about sex, reading about sex, doodling pornographically, looking at erotic magazines, renting videos, dreaming of sex, looking at fashion magazines, cleaning up after sex, coping with the consequences of sex, building towers, or otherwise repressing, transferring, and sublimating. And I like this passage because it illustrates 2 points, 2 important points. One is we don't actually spend that much time on sex. In fact, the 4 minutes and 3 seconds is an interesting number because when you do time studies on how much Americans spend filling out tax-related forms for the IRS, it's 4 minutes and a few seconds. But the passage also points out that regardless of the brute time we spend on it, it is extraordinarily important. Everything in life follows from it. Marriage, family, children, much of aggression, much of competition, much of art and music and creative pursuits, much of everything follows from it. If we were a creature without sex, everything would be different. And what's interesting is there are creatures without sex. There are creatures that reproduce by cloning. And in fact, this basic fact about people, that we fall roughly into males and females, is an evolutionary mystery. It's not clear why animals that are somewhat large have two sexes. From a biological Darwinian perspective, having two sexes is bizarre, because each time you have an offspring, you toss away half your genes. My children each of them have half my DNA. If I was to clone, they would have all of it. And so it's a puzzle how sex ever evolved. This is not a course in evolutionary biology, and that's not the puzzle we're going to be looking at today. We're going to look at a few questions. First, we're going to talk from first a theoretical point of view, and then an empirical point of view about how males and females are different. Then we're going to talk about sexual attractiveness, some research about what people find to be sexually attractive, and then we'll talk a very little bit at the end about the origins of sexual preference, why some people are straight, others gay, others bisexual, and others harder to classify. Now, of all the topics I'm presenting, sex is one of the sort of dicey ones from an emotional point of view. These are difficult issues because sex is, by definition, an intimate part of our lives, and it matters a lot. Moreover, sex is fraught with moral implications. And since I'm talking about this from, at least at the beginning, from a Darwinian evolutionary perspective, I'm obliged to start off by dealing with some of the moral consequences and moral implications. So for instance, Many biologists, all biologists I would say, will have argued that, that sexual behavior, sexual action, sexual desire is to some extent a biological adaptation existing to spread our genes. From that perspective then, non-procreative sex, including gay sex, sex with birth control, sex by postmenopausal women, does not serve this reproductive goal, and in some sense perhaps is unnatural. And one might argue then, does this mean it's wrong? We'll also be talking about sex differences. Differences between men and women, for instance, in how much you want anonymous sexual encounters. Differences between men and women in social intelligence, in aggression and empathy. And regardless of what you think about these differences, whether you think they're right or wrong or doesn't matter, you'll ask the question, to what extent are they mutable? That is, if they exist through Darwinian natural selection, to what extent can we ever get rid of them? And I want to address those two issues, the issues of morality and inevitability, from the very start. And I want to start off with, for each of them, have a quote by a prominent evolutionary scholar. So the first one is by Steve Pinker in How the Mind Works. And he writes, "Nature does not dictate what we should accept or how we should live our lives. Well into my procreating years, I am so far voluntarily childless, having squandered my biological resources reading and writing, doing research, helping out friends and students, and jogging in circles, ignoring the solemn imperative to spread my genes."